I
Yes.
was just saying about the fact that I'm conscious that most coaches look like me. What I mean by that is that they are white women. And I think it's really important that we have coaches that look like the people we are trying to empower within the workplace, and thinking about the pipeline of leaders having coaches who look like them, but who also have had that shared experience is something I think it's really, really important for us to be considering. So when we partnered with CVP, it was for that reason, thinking about how could we consciously create a more diverse group of coaches. And the questions I ask are often like, who gets coaching, but who gets to be a coach? And is it an open opportunity to develop lots of people, or is it a limitation? Is it the same people getting the same opportunities? I think that's something for us to really, really consider. With that in mind, if you could click me on, please, Adam, because I'm going to go into the kind of the first theme of tonight. So I get asked to do lots of presentations on belonging, and the verb I put in front of belonging is cultivating a culture of belonging, rather than nurturing or creating. For me, cultivation needs ongoing care, ongoing attention. We need to be watering, seeding, weeding, and paying constant attention to the culture we're in. And belonging isn't a fixed state, it's something we have to constantly be thinking about. So I'm going to start by getting you to think about belonging, and Adam's going to get you to think about coaching and think about how these two ideas come together. So next slide, please, Adam. So there's lots of different acronyms and buzzwords around there, and whatever buzzword or acronym you're using in your context, I want you to think about these 5 words specifically. What we mean by diversity, what we mean by equity, what we mean by inclusion. So we use DEI as our root, not EDI, which is equality. And I think coaching can be a tool for equity, making sure we are finding and removing those barriers. But the 2 letters that now get attached onto the acronym are often the B for belonging and the S for social justice. Okay, so thinking about what belonging means to us, it's an idea of relatedness, an idea of connectedness, and an idea of acceptance. How I characterize that is that we can pay attention to and work on diversity, equity, and inclusion. We can't control belonging. I can't control how you feel. What I can control is removing the barriers and the mechanisms that might prevent you from belonging. So thinking about how coaching might be one of those tools to create a better sense of belonging for people is something to consider. Go on to the next slide for me, please, Adam. Okay, belonging being more than a buzzword. How many events have we all seen in the last few months that are called belonging? How many people are now posting on LinkedIn about belonging? I worry that it has become a bit of a buzzword, and some organisations are now just talking belonging without talking diversity, equity, inclusion. And I find that highly problematic. It's kind of putting a plaster on the problem. So I do want us to think about how all those ideas come together. Next slide, please. So we frame all of our learning at DiverseEd through what I call consciousness, confidence, and competence. And if we think about this about for belonging, but also for coaching for belonging, what are we conscious of when it comes to us and our identity? I'm really conscious I'm a white straight woman when I'm coaching. I'm often coaching a woman of colour. So being conscious of my identity, my lived experience, and how I need to be conscious of someone else's lived experience and identity, and how our worldviews might be different, is that first tier, the kind of the awareness piece. I call that the looking in the mirror. The second tier is the confidence, recognizing that we all have areas where we are confident, but we also have areas where we lack confidence. So I quite often get asked to coach people who have a different identity to my own because they want to be empowered and they want to build confidence, and recognizing that and talking about that is perhaps part of our coaching conversation. So thinking about how we help agency and empowerment kind of come to fruition. And the competence, you might all be here tonight to develop your competence, to think about what are specific skills that you need, whatever role you have. Okay, how do we become more culturally competent coaches, more racially conscious, competent coaches to really feed and serve our clients? Go on the next slide, please, Adam. Thinking about tonight, okay, conscious around the identities in the room, or the identities that might be in the coaching room, and the lived experiences in the room. Confidence around the kind of the discomfort about talking about these things and thinking about these things, doing the inner work before the outer work, like looking in the mirror before we look out the window, and thinking about how the allyship piece, actually coaching is a great tool for allyship, okay, and how coaching can be used to perhaps bring awareness back to the allies as well. Thank you, Adam. So that's the metaphor I want you to think about, okay? As coaches, we help people to look in the mirror before we look out the window. We use that metaphor also for the curriculum, for the library, but for us as a group of professionals, whether we are here because we are coaching, we want to coach, or we want to be coached, thinking about those two lenses, I think, is really, really important. Thank you, Adam. Going back to those 5 words, those 5 letters, I frame most of how I do dialogue with people around coaching questions. I did a coaching course years ago at Graydon. I did another course with Viv Grant Integrity, and we talked about trying not to use why questions in coaching, always asking how questions or what questions. So you've got 5 coaching questions here to think about how to bring our awareness to the table about these different strands of a DIB kind of commitment. So if I look at the I one, for example, who are we intentionally including and who might we be unintentionally excluding? For the people here with the PD hat on, looking at a whole trust PD commitment, who's consciously being included in coaching at the moment? Who gets to be trained to be a coach? Who gets access to coaching? Are we inadvertently excluding people by how we are doing that selection process? And you will get all of these slides. You have to write everything down. I'll send you a set of the slides afterwards. Thank you, Adam. Creating and holding safe spaces is something I think about and talk about quite a lot. So we know in a coaching relationship, the first thing we do is we create a safe container. We co-create and we contract how that space is going to operate. And I find that curious that we do that in coaching. We also do that in the classroom. Okay, so all of those of you who have been pupil-facing, classroom-facing in the past or now, the first thing you do when you meet a group of pupils is you co-create a safe space. We agree the learning environment. We agree how we're going to show up, how we're going to interact, how we're going to hold them to account. I want you to get curious about in your workplace, have we or should we be contracting safe spaces for the adults in the building, i.e. any meetings, SLT meetings, governance meetings, any one-to-one line management, any spaces that we are holding for others, for example, a briefing or a training. I think we often assume safety, but we actually need to design safety. We need to implicitly codify what that safety looks like. Anyone who knows me, I'm a bit of a gobshite, okay? I'm really extroverted, I'm very direct speaking. If I've got a problem with you, I will bang on your door, whoever you are, and I will tell you that. I'm very aware that lots of my colleagues in the past would not do that, based on a number of different things. Their confidence, whether they're introverted or extroverted, whether they're neurodivergent, whether they hold a marginalised identity, whether it's about their status within the building. I want us to make sure that we are consciously creating safe spaces for dialogue and not assuming it. Have any of you used or heard someone in your context use, we've got an open door policy in our school? Anyone can bang on my door and talk to me at any point. My question would be, who is banging on your door? Who is stepping over the threshold? And who is giving you feedback? And I've had some really interesting conversations with head teachers I've said that to, and they've been horrified that they think they're being inclusive. My reframe would be, how are we going to go and find the people and talk to people and listen to the people? Because we should be stepping out of our comfort zones and not expecting people to come into our own. Thank you, Adam. So with that in mind, very quick link to who we are, for those of you who heard about DiverseEd before, we started 7 years ago because we saw there were lots of siloed activity about diversity, equity, inclusion, and education. I co-started Women Ed 10 years ago, BAME then started, LGBT then started, Disability then started. 4 brilliant organisations, but at this point I was a head teacher and my deputy head occupied all 4 of those groups. And she had to cut herself in 4 to go to 4 events and talk to 1/4 of her identity. That is why we started DiverseEd, to have a joint conversation, a holistic conversation. So the 9 colours on the floor here represent the 9 identities protected in the Equality Act, and thinking about how we create spaces that are holistic and intersectional to consider all of them simultaneously, not that we're going to do one this year, one next year, and one the year after, because that's not how identity works. Our mantra, be where you're celebrated, not tolerated. I could go for a whole hour and a half just about the British values and how problematic the British values are. The 4th British value, mutual respect and tolerance. Do we want people to be tolerated for being different, for being diverse, for holding marginalised identities? I don't think tolerance is enough. We want people to be accepted, respected, understood, empathized with, and all celebrated. So thinking about how coaching can help to create that culture when we move from tolerance through acceptance to celebration is also something to consider. Thank you, Adam. So here's the question I want you all to think about, and you can either use the chat and give me some thoughts in the chat, or you can feel free to unmute and verbalize. What does the word belonging mean to you? What do you need to belong? Because it's going to be different for each person on this call. Just take a moment to reflect on that question and either type something in the chat, or if you want to pop your hand up and say it out loud, absolutely fine as well. What does it mean to you to belong? So Adam started a collective sense of identity, to feel listened to. Thank you, Melanie. Being myself, that idea of bringing your whole self, being authentic. Thank you, Carla. Yeah, not holding back. Thank you, Amy. Strong sense of connection. Thank you, Martin. Anything we're missing there? Feeling valued, feeling safe, listened to, but also heard. Yeah, really important. There's a difference there, isn't there? Part of something with shared values. Thank you, Joe. Just pop the next slide on for me, please, Adam. Listen to me in such a way that I can do my best thinking. Love it. Yeah, don't have to second guess myself. Thank you. Great thoughts. They are all the things I hear regularly. And this list isn't hierarchical. Okay. We belong when we feel seen, we feel heard, we feel included, we feel accepted, understood, respected, valued, safe. When we are able to be authentic, when we're able to bring our whole selves to the workplace. All of those things are part of belongingness. And for each of us, different ones will perhaps be the higher order ones, the trump ones for us. I think where belonging goes wrong is that we often think what I need to belong is what someone else needs to belong. So if I recreate what I need to belong, you will belong, but different people need different things. And I think we often overcomplicate it and we do a big strategic plan and a load of activity when really, if we just ask people, what do you need to belong? And we listened and we responded, that might make a massive difference. The two at the bottom are the ones that sometimes split the room. A lot's been written about authenticity. Brene Brown in particular has written lots about authenticity, but she's also been scolded by colleagues, particularly women of colour, about authenticity when you identify as being white and authenticity when you are racialized as being black or brown. And I've really thought about this, okay, going back to me banging on doors, vocalizing my opinion throughout my whole career. Hannah has always got to be authentic. I've always been able to be authentic because I'm often in a majority identity group in the spaces I exist in. So when I say something, and I can be quite assertive, I can be quite outspoken, it's often heard. I'm going to use Carla as my example because I know Carla very well. Carla might say the same thing that Hannah's saying, but because Carla said it and the way Carla said it, Hannah's assertive and Carla's aggressive. Okay, so we're not letting people be authentic. We're putting them into boxes and we're using particular descriptors around particular identities, which links to the bottom one, which again, sometimes jars people, being able to bring our whole selves. I'll talk about this one in the fact, as a school leader, I've always wanted to create schools where people can bring their whole selves if they want to bring their whole selves, but there's no pressure to bring their whole selves. And what I mean by that is no one has to disclose anything about their identity. Some people are deeply private, want to keep personal life and professional life separately. I completely get that. But I don't want the school to have any barriers where someone can't be out if they're trans, someone can't be out if they've got a mental health issue, someone can't be out if they're gay. That to me is the whole self bit, that we're removing the barriers, the blockers, the inhibitors, so people can choose because they know it's safe for them to be able to share. Okay, so those two at the bottom don't always sit with everyone, but I think they're part of our responsibility as leaders within education as well. Thank you, Adam. So this is an activity I want you to think through, and I'm going to invite you to come off mute and share some thoughts with me. If we go back to when we were a child, okay, whatever age you want to go back to, when you were at school in primary or secondary or sixth form, I want you to think about all the different spaces we occupy as pupils within a school context. And I want you to consider, from the list I've given you here, but you can add other spaces to it as well, which of these spaces affirmed you and built up your sense of belonging, and which of these spaces challenged you and potentially eroded your sense of belonging? Because again, it will be different for every person on the call. Just take a minute to read out that list and pick a couple that were green and a couple that were red and think why. How do they make you feel? How do they impact your belonging as a pupil in school? And I'm really aware this might bring up a whole lot of memories and a whole lot of emotion. It might even be triggering for some people about spaces that weren't safe and didn't affirm us when we were children in school. Our human default is to go to all the spaces that were problematic. I'm going to ask you first to share which of these spaces affirmed us and gave us belonging and why. Could I ask a couple of you to come off mute and pick one of these spaces and tell me how it gave you belonging as a pupil when you were at school? Thank you, Sally. Hi.
Hi, I thought I'd start. I put classroom and tutor room just because, particularly tutor, we were a collective. We were together for the 5 years at secondary school, knew one another. It felt a safe space. We had the same tutor that kind of nurtured us. Same with the classroom. I was quite academic, quite bright. So I say bright, that sounded really arrogant, but I felt comfortable in the classroom in terms of learning. They were my positive, happy spaces.
Thank you, Sally. Okay, so 2 spaces that really affirmed you. Tutor rooms often come up, the idea of togetherness and belongingness. The lock of the drawer, though, isn't it? Who's in your tutor room and who you're tutoring. Because if you've got the wrong tutor for 5 years, that can be really, really tricky. So there's pros and cons there. And the classroom, if we are in classrooms where we can access the learning and we feel safe and we've got a teacher who keeps us safe, then great, loads of belonging. But I'm sure for some of you, those 2 spaces were the opposite for you as well. So thank you, Sally. Who wants to build on what Sally said and pick out 2 that affirmed you?
I can help you there, Hannah.
Go for it, Hannah. Go for it.
The changing room affirmed me because as a black girl going swimming, a few of us would use cream on our bodies and other children wouldn't, who have another ethnicity, and we would be able to stick together because that's what we did. And in the playground, a similar experience. Certain children played with each other and we would be playing with ourselves, particularly games like chasing each other, rhymes, nursery rhymes. We would be together because we felt safe.
Love that, Carla. So you're really drawn to the social spaces, the less structured spaces where you could choose who you were with and your belongingness was togetherness, really, with people with shared identity. Thank you, Carla. Can I do one more? Read the positive affirmations. Who else wants to pick 2? Go for it, Melanie. If you want to unmute, so we can need to unmute first so we can hear you. There she is.
Very much like Carla, I think. Yeah, definitely the social situations, playground and clubs, I'd say. Being of mixed heritage, Black, Caribbean, white, I grew up in a very white school, neighbourhood and what have you, but I had really close friends and I had the same interests as them. We went to the youth clubs of the day, listening to Wham, the same music. And I particularly remember in the playground, this was in primary school, and I remember Boney M song coming out, Brown Girl in the Ring. And I was the brown girl in the ring, and I was proud to be the brown girl in the ring, and no one else could be.
I love you. Kind of like soundtrack to your childhood there. And I'm glad that was a positive experience, because brown girl in the ring, I imagine, could have been quite a negative experience for some young people as well. Love that. Thank you so much, Melanie. Would anyone like to take us to the opposite side? Like, which of these spaces actually really challenged our sense of belonging and why? Which eroded our belonging? Martin, jump in.
Yeah, it's really interesting, the sort of polaristic experiences, because the playground and changing rooms when I was at primary school were really positive places. And then I moved across from Lancashire to Yorkshire with my dad's role there when I was in year 8. Very overweight as a teenager, and then they were the absolute opposite. So really polaristic experiences, great at primary school and then not secondary.
Really interesting, based on your own relationship with yourself, but also the
and with others as well. Yeah.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else want to jump in? Problematic spaces that challenged our sense of belonging. Jo, go for it.
The bus was an awful space for me. We had to travel about half an hour to my secondary school, and I was on the last pickup. So there's so many faces looking at you when you kind of get on the bus. And I don't know about others' experience of school bus, but there was the the people on the back row who owned the back row. No one was allowed on the back seat, and it was just such an intimidating space for me, and none of my friends really got the bus either. It was, it was a quite a lonely experience for me. But in a similar way, playground, I think just the whole the chaos of the playground and people kind of running around, just hated that environment.
Yeah, thank you, Jo. And it's like running the gauntlet, isn't it? And the
Mm.
spaces that might affirm some of us actually really challenge others. I've thought about my physical size quite a lot. I'm 6'1". I've always been tall, so I've never had a problem. I've never felt unsafe really in the corridor, in the stairwell, in the playground. But I've worked with people, I've mentored people who are like 5'1" and very, very petite, who absolutely hate being on corridor duty, hate being on playground duty, because they can't see what's going on, and the students are twice their size. So just recognizing our different relationship with these spaces, I think, is really important. And for all of you who are school-based, this is a really interesting exercise to do with different stakeholders, where you do a heat map of your school and you hear from your pupils which of these spaces affirm us, which of these spaces are problematic for us. And then as adults, what can we do? Like, you might have to redeploy some staff, for example, on duties. Asking the staff that, they might have a completely different perspective. So how we triangulate the people experience to the staff experience, and not assuming because I had a bad experience in the changing rooms playing hockey when I was 13, doesn't mean that everyone else hates the changing room, but who might be vulnerable in some of these different spaces, who might feel invisible and unseen. How can we create a greater sense of belonging for our pupils is the first kind of way of thinking about it. Adam, if you jump onto the next slide, I'm going to fast forward you all to now being adults, but also professionals. Okay, we're all at different points of our journey, thinking about our belongingness within the profession we've chosen to join, education, thinking about when we left sixth form and trained, whether that's college or university, how we became teachers or educators, whatever role we hold. I'm 25 years in now, I did 20 years in school. So how I felt about my belonging when I started my career to when I was a middle leader to when I was a senior leader, my relationship completely changed on that journey based on what teams I was in, what schools I was in. Also then thinking about the kind of the things we do around PD. So if you've done your NPQSL, QH, whatever it might be, train to coach, what was your sense of belonging within those spaces? And then your wider network. Just take a minute or two to think about that. Where have you had a greater sense of belonging and why professionally? And where have you had a lesser sense of belonging and why professionally? I'll stop talking for a moment. I'm going to share my reflection on this one first. So I'm an English teacher by trade. When I did my degree and my PGCE, everyone looked like me. And I've worked in 6 English departments where they're female heavy. So I had a really strong sense of belonging as an English teacher at the start of my career, at the middle of my career. It was when I became more senior, and I've served on 2 SLTs where I was the only female. So as a feminist, as someone who's passionate about gender equality, female representation, the more senior I got and the more sort of like power I got within my role, the less belonging I had, because I found myself in spaces where my identity was being challenged regularly, and where how I led was considered different. And being a youngish female head at 37, I can remember walking down a corridor at parents' evening and hearing a group of dads in a huddle bitching about where were the men in the school, because we had a female head and 2 female deputy heads in a secondary school, and they couldn't understand where the men were. Okay, so that's my relationship with belonging as a professional, my identity and my journey. Anyone else want to just jump in and share any reflections here about your relationship with belonging as an adult, as a professional? Where's it been its highest? Where's it been its lowest, and why?
I've found it really interesting that I've taught for 30 years and in the city schools all the way through. So I've felt been lucky. I've worked with some great staff, great leaders, and felt that sense of connection and belonging right the way through there. But I stepped down from being a head after 12 years in summer. So now I'm the director of coaching, and my work is all from home. So now, and I'm connecting with 30 senior leaders from across our trust, which is great, but it's almost still virtual. So I really, really miss the sense of connection from chatting to the staff, the kids, every day.
That really resonates, Martin. I miss the staff room. I miss the pub. I miss the end of term gatherings. When you work for yourself from home, you don't get any of that. Like, see Carla's smiling and nodding. because she's probably gone through this recently with her changing role as well. So yeah, our sense of belonging really changes, and working remotely, working hybrid, anyone who works flexibly within our workplaces, we have to work even harder to help them have a sense of belonging, because the things that work for a full-timer, someone in the building, is very different from someone who works virtually. So thank you, Martin. Anyone else want to jump in with a reflection? I'll share one. I've got lots of friends who are women of colour, who are senior leaders, head teachers like I've been, who never saw anyone who looked like them. They were the only person of colour on their PCE, the only person of colour in their school. When they became senior leaders and head teachers, one of them talked about being the only black head teacher in Bristol. And when she used to go to the head teacher, the secondary head teacher network meetings, she'd go to the school that was hosting it, she'd sign in, she'd be sent to the parent interview room, because the assumption was her kid had been excluded, not that she was a head teacher. Or when she went into the head teacher meeting room, someone asked her for a cup of tea because they assumed she worked there and she wasn't a head teacher. That really made me think about belonging, how it feel. When my deputy, who went on headship interview to a school down the road from us, South Oxfordshire, got asked the question at interview, why would someone like you want to be a head teacher in a school like this? I'm not quite sure how she's expected to answer that. What, because I'm gay, because I'm brown, my face isn't fit? Okay, belonging gets challenged on a daily basis. When I run this training session with big SLTs around the country, I often have people who almost go a bit quiet on me, often white straight women, who will say to me, I've never had to think about it. I've never thought about this before, Hannah. I've never had to think about my belonging before, because I always get to belong. And I think that's a wake-up call for us all. Some of us just take it for granted that we belong. Some people always feel like they don't belong. And how can we impact that, particularly as coaches, particularly as PD kind of leads? I'm conscious of the time, Adam. Let's move on. I want to make sure I get to you on time. It all links back to Maz's hierarchy of needs, which I'm sure everyone on the call is familiar with. I want just to spotlight right there in the middle is the word belonging. Okay, so think about our young people and how we really consider the needs our children have within our schools, but our adults have needs as well. Our adults need the physical and safety need meeting, but our adults also need love and belonging. That sense of connectivity and togetherness is a make or break, really, for how someone feels about themselves and how someone feels about their place within the team. And I'd really ask you to look at your HR data, your recruitment data, your attrition data, and to really dig into it and look at the trends and patterns of who doesn't belong in your school, who doesn't belong in your trust, who is leaving, who is voting with their feet. When I spent a year working in a university running a PCE, I had 450 trainee teachers, and I got given a list of 35 who had dropped out the year before, and my job was to contact them all and re-engage them all. After my sixth phone call, I realised quite quickly what happened. Every single person on the list had a protected characteristic. Every single person was marginalised in different ways. The uni was really good at catering for the majority and not very good at thinking about the minority and thinking about what people might need differently, what concessions and adjustments people might need to enable them to access the course. I had people who were career changers. I had people who were carers. I had people with 4 children, people who spoke different language, people who were dyslexic, and the university wasn't meeting their needs. So they didn't belong, so they didn't have self-esteem, and they actually dropped off the course. Okay, so thinking about how we want to help people have a sense of self-esteem, self-confidence, but also self-actualization to fulfill our potential, I think is really important. Next slide, please, Adam. I think we'll have to skip. Can we skip this one, please? Can we skip a couple, actually? What have we got? Skip that one. I'm going to finish on this one, okay? Go back one, please, just for a second. So the word of power and privilege, and you might have seen this before, I know some of you might use it in your various settings. I'm not saying I agree with this model, but this model is a helpful way of us to think about how identity grants us or gives us power and privilege, and how that power and privilege gives us an access to power or positionality that we sometimes need to consider. If you think about where you might sit yourself on this wheel, okay, so around the outside, you've got different identities. They're not all protected characteristics. Age is missing, faith is missing. And then you've got the different kind of tiers that bring you closer or further away from that central point. And the question I want you to think about as coaches, as people who care about coaching, is how might it feel to exist in the margins? If you're marginalized in multiple ways, how might it feel? And how might coaching help someone and support someone who finds themselves on the margins? Some of you might find yourself on the outer circle, and how might coaching have helped you? Some of you might find yourself in the middle. I'm quite in the middle for quite a lot of these identities. How do I use that awareness and that power to support others and think about what they might need from me as a coach, as a support? So give you a moment just to process that and do a little bit of thinking. And I'll give you an example. I coach a lot of women of colour. I was coaching someone last week who shared a story with me. And you're not supposed to be horrified as a coach, but I was horrified. And when we talked it through, I affirmed her and how she was feeling. And she said, "You're the only person who's ever made me feel like it's not okay what I'm going through." And that's where coaching can be such a safe space, such a supportive space, where we are creating a container for people to share really deep things. And we as a coach are there to hold that for them, but also to help them navigate it. And I've helped her navigate a really difficult conversation, a coach's conversation with her line manager about some of the behaviours she's experiencing. And if she hadn't had that conversation, she probably would have resigned. Okay, so thinking about how we as coaches are actually helping people stay true to themselves, find and use their voice, but also make sure they're in an aligned place, I think is really important. If we skip on, Adam, because I want to get to your bit, and we can do any questions about my bit later on. Skip on for me, please. I've clearly overplanned. My message is always about how we can move from being reactive to proactive. I truly believe that coaching can be a proactive tool to creating inclusive workplaces, inclusive cultures, as opposed to a reactive kind of way of working. So thinking about who gets that entitlement to be coached and how it might really support them on their journey and bolster them on their journey. I know Martin, because Martin works at Co-op, and we're doing a big piece of Co-op about supporting global majority aspirant senior leaders, and they all get coaching. And we've already had multiple promotions and retentions through that work, because it's a proactive mechanism rather than a reactive mechanism. Thank you, Adam. Skip on to this one. Let's get into your bit. I'll come back to these questions if we have time at the end. So over to part 2 and my colleague Adam.
Thank you, Hannah. Yeah, I've not heard a lot of that before. I've seen that. I've not seen that power wheel in that format. So really helpful. And part of my role now is to share with you a couple of anecdotes and a formula that ultimately only materialized post. So it might be quite interesting for some of you on this apprenticeship. Post my coaching qualification, once I had done all the training and I could take a step back and try and analyze actually how do we create an environment where we can use practical strategies to cultivate a culture of belonging, to empower your teams through internal coaching. And so I'm going to try and provide some real actionable insights. And it's an adaptation of a webinar that I gave at the tail end of last year, with some slants around how to create that sense of belonging in your team with different hats that we wear. So interestingly, this isn't actually in the coaching curriculum, but we're looking at ways that we can start to integrate that as part of the apprenticeship. So I always start off with a little bit of a story, and it's a little bit cringy, but really this was me on my first day in work. And it's interesting you talk around belonging, Hannah, because this was me showing up with my dad's briefcase on my first day of work, where I really didn't feel that I belonged. I'd come from university and I was a graduate, and I wanted to make out like I knew everything, but underneath there was a lot of insecurities there. And the reason I always show this is because depending on where you are in your life depends on how, as a person in the workplace, we feel, how we're treated, and being mindful of that, as Hannah mentioned, to enable people to feel in a safe space is absolutely fundamental as a coach, that we try and hold neutrality and non-judgmentalism in our spaces. So skip forward a little bit, and I sort of have moved on recently to say, how do we create a team of people that are self-starters, feel like they belong, and can empower them to do the things that they want to do, regardless of their feelings of not being accepted, I suppose. And coaching plays a massive part in doing that. So the reason I share this is it's really interesting. Particularly, there's a lot of females on this, but one of the things that I find in terms of coaching, and someone asked me this the other day, what makes a good coach? And I used the word empathy. And 25-year-old me, who was managing a team of 13 people, didn't really understand empathy. And I think as we get a little bit older and wiser, perhaps having those key skills and understanding that we've got better emotional regulation and training around those skills enables us to relate to people in the environment, particularly newer, younger people coming up, and share those skills with those people. So we've got loads and loads of examples of this. So part of the work that I've taken on this is taken from people that have done this program and have actually used coaching to accelerate some of their work in the workplace, supported the work that they've done on MPQs, importantly used to increase engagement and improve all aspects of their teaching and experimentation and their informed practice in the workplace. So think about what I'm going to share with you and then think about how you can use that for your role in your environment. So you might be thinking, okay, great, but I'm a really busy leader. How do I fit all this training in with my coaching and my CPD and my staff and everything else? So like, don't worry, because everyone can benefit from this session. One of the ways that I've structured this session is so that you can integrate it naturally within part of what you do. So whether you're a teacher, HR manager, consultant, everyone should be thinking about this in the workplace. And actually, how do we embed coaching, not just on a one-to-one level, but at the highest level, which I'll talk to at the end, which is at an organizational level. Because if we can empower people at an organizational level to be self-starters, then that's where the magic happens. That does start off by having coaching conversation and a dialogue at the beginning to ensure that people are comfortable with the process of coaching. Okay. So, internal coaching. This, out of everything that we've looked at, and there was some research from in 2023 by Randstad that showed that the fastest way to build trust is by adopting an internal coaching framework, because it enables your team to grow and take responsibility for an ownership of their own roles. So what do we mean by coaching framework? It means an environment where your team members can talk to you in a non-judgmental setting that they don't feel that they're going to be marginalized for. So that means you allowing them to own the agenda. And ultimately, a lot of you are aware of this. This is kind of how we teach this and how we break this flow down over the course of 12 months to make sure that you're familiar with all these different concepts and teach the different models. And these kind of key parts are the key components that we teach, which together can ultimately form part of a coaching framework. And I always think of coaching, being able to coach now in the workplace, is being able to draw on those tools as and when you need them. So what I want you to take away from this is that the only way to get the balance you need is to do the work through your teams, and the only way to create self-sufficiency for people is through internal coaching. So I'm going to skip this forward a little bit. It's just a little bit more around my journey. And you might be thinking, well, that's all great, but I'm kind of swamped in paperwork and admin. And how do I actually get to do this? Because I don't have enough time. Interestingly, implementing these internal coaching mechanisms will enable you to reclaim your time back, which seems counterintuitive. Think of it as a pound invested now is going to yield you £2 in the future. So sometimes when you're learning these, and this is important for people that are learning and developing their craft as coaches, it seems very time consuming. But if you get it right, you will get that time back. So my realization came when I was working remotely, coaching line reports, and my time was limited. And I thought, I'm going to have to combine this way in a way that feels natural to everyone, but enables me also to address the key things that people want to know, which is, are they performing? What are the KPI indicators? But actually, how do I break through any limiting beliefs on why I am or am not achieving my goals? So what we did was we created a brand for performance improvement. And this is a really interesting way to do it. And it's a little bit like finding your coaching niche. So we called them Spark sessions, but you could call them virtual coffee, power hours, but you brand the coaching model that you're doing to remove people's barriers. So I don't know about you, but like put your hand up if you look forward to your one-to-ones, right? it's kind of got this like stigma about it. I'm going for a 1-to-1 and it's a binary number. Yes, I've hit my target. No, I've not hit my target. But actually, I'm going for a virtual coffee with my manager. It might feel less overwhelming. And so how we brand it matters. So it's going to feel unusual at first, and you'll want to give advice. A lot of people may have found that being on the course. But really, when we're trying to create this culture of belonging, it's about actually having the coachee own the agenda. And this is what we teach on the course. So at the end, from some of the work that we did, we found that everyone had moved up in the scale, so that the coaching session was helping improve their overall well-being and mental health. It helped support and build rapport. It helped them feel better connected to the organization. So it helped them identify their own solutions. So the list goes on. And keep this in mind for a little bit later, because one of the things that you're going to want to do if you're going to implement any of these skills is actually survey at the beginning to check that those parameters have moved, which in this case, they were 3s and 4s, and then they were averaging 4.6 at the end in some of these. I started to build trust with the team, and they started to feel heard. So after 18 years, really, I discovered the hard way that if you've been struggling, then this is probably the reason why. And because you've not necessarily been building that trust. And this is a picture of my niece and my daughter walking around the local reservoir, which naturally is the reason I put it in there is naturally as children we trust each other, and then as we get older, interesting listening to some of Hannah's stories around how people have been treated, and listening to some of the stories around how people congregated together when they were younger, we tend to not trust each other as much. And coaching's about breaking that down, actually, to say it's okay, you can trust me, and I'm going to treat you in a non-judgmental manner with unconditional positive regard. So again, we've gone through this, and a few people have actually put these into place and shown that they do work. So I'm going to run through 3 styles of leadership techniques that I think if you grasp as part of either your coaching journey now, or if you're a qualified coach or you're looking to implement coaching models, will enable you to build trust and belonging with your teams. And this only clicked for me, actually, which is why I share post lots of coaching experience, really. And that is, the first one is the internal coach. So how to shift behavior and performance in your role as an internal coach. Style number 2. So the way to think about this is we need to wear different hats as managers and leaders. So style number 2 is the hybrid manager. So how to provide your team with insights and awareness through coaching. And then style number 3 is leadership coach. So what do I mean by this? In your role as a coach, what you're going to be going through now, maybe a lot of people that are either on the apprenticeship or coach people, is you'll often act as an internal coach. So you will have an hour-long coaching session, but then you'll find at the end, you might not have been able to provide that individual with the insights you want within that coaching framework. So how then do you step up to the next stage, which is give people the skills that they need so you can coach them to break down limiting beliefs, mentor and guide them to support to get the skills they need. And then once you've cracked that, you can then operate in capacity as a leadership coach, which is about how to create a coaching culture. So the internal coach, the dreaded one-to-one meetings. I put this up there because this is how one-to-one meetings used to look. And it was dry, it was data-driven, and it wasn't actually addressing that individual's person's needs. So step number 1, when you're looking to implement coaching as an internal coach, is tear up the playbook, right? Rewrite the way that you are approaching that by recontracting with the individuals that you're working with. So one of the reasons I say that is so important is because if somebody does not enjoy or dreads or has anxiety around a performance measure such as a one-to-one, you can reframe that and reestablish that relationship by saying, this is the way that we're going to do it now. And what you'll find is, at first, there may not be a degree of trust. Particularly, we've had a member of staff that came from an environment that was very traditional. And it was, you hit your target or you get sacked. And so they were constantly turning up to one-to-one sessions with a narrative about this person didn't respond to that email, or this person didn't respond to that. And so we had to reshift the focus to say, I don't care about whether you've hit your target this month. I care about, are you making progress? Are you learning from what you've done? And are we creating an environment where you can actually feel listened to progress? And you're going to get a much better response from people from doing that. So the first thing that you want to do is survey the team. Okay. So my question to you would be, if you haven't surveyed your team, or you haven't looked at how to create or improve that culture or belonging within the past 12 months, I would say possibly 6, you might not want to do over 12 months. How do you know what's important to your team? And how do you know how you can move the needle for them? And if you're looking to implement a coaching culture, like we'll talk about in that last slide, then you're going to need to start off with tearing up the playbook and then surveying your team. So these were some of the questions that we asked, which was, how do you feel your one-to-ones are now? How do you find the coaching sessions that currently exist within the organization? How well connected do you feel to the people within the organization and your manager? And then once you've done that and you've created that framework, that culture, so you've reestablished the parameters of the relationship, you've surveyed the team, and you've got the results, you can then go back to the drawing board and create a model that you think is going to help these people progress. So in this instance, for us, we created these Spark sessions, which was personal update, how you're going, what's going on in your life, what are you facing in the workplace that you are unable to, or that you want to discuss, that you want to make progress on. And that's the pure coaching bit. So that is the, what would you like to achieve from this call? How would you grade yourself in terms of 1 to 10 about being able to deal with this? What have you learned from the session? The grow model, essentially, for a lot of people from it. And then at the end, you'd look at saying, giving some guidance and a little bit of notes, because they're not pure coaching clients, it's organizational coaching. So you have to adapt a little bit around the way that you approach that. And then, of course, as you implement this, Fisher's transition curve talks around people are going to be, particularly some people are going to be resistant to this at first. But as long as you can identify that that's part of the natural change curve and change model, and that people will eventually get gradual acceptance and move forward. And we saw this was textbook stuff when we implemented it. You will find that if you stick with it, people will adopt to that change. Okay. And then lastly, and again, one of the things that you see on the course is use appropriate feedback mechanisms to collect feedback and appropriate evaluation models. A couple of really useful ones here. Kirkpatrick's 4-level training evaluation model, and the SIP's quite a good one actually for evaluating a project or a phase that you've been on. So we found that people that we've taught this to have actually, come back, they've got promotions, they've got ahead, and they felt that the coaching sessions were supported to be able to help people achieve targets and create that kind of sense of well-being in the workplace. So again, who does it work for? Managers, people leading others, people in a that have a relationship or are managing other people, and all types of people in charge of performance. So will it work for you? Well, yes, it will. This was somebody in our organization who's happy to share this, that really did not want to be coached. And what actually happened after the first few sessions, and this was genuine feedback from him, he realized that the power of using his own thoughts to address the solutions within the organizations through the questions and frameworks that we did helped him find solutions that I wouldn't have been able to come up with. And so if you stick with it, particularly if you feel resistance at first, you will find that if you implement some of these strategies, and again, obviously on the short space of time, we can't go into the hows, but the overall sense of what you do is how you kind of implement that. Okay. And then use the feedback you get to support and guide other people through. So, Hannah, from a time perspective, I did say I might get through two sections of the what have I got?
What have you got left?
Yeah.
10 minutes, 15 minutes?
10. Cool. Yeah. So I'll probably get to the next stage, which is the hybrid manager, and then we'll sort of come to a bit of a Q&A. So to recap, when you're looking at implementing a culture of belonging and identity in the workplace, it starts off with the internal coach. Tear up the playbook, survey the team, sketch out your blueprint, manage the change, and collect your feedback. So, Hannah, I'm going to jump into some drop people into breakout sessions in a minute. So what I would like to do now, and I'm assuming that the people that are kind of in video are still there. They may not be. So it might be a bit of a juggle, jump back in if you jump into a room and the person's not there. Spend a few minutes now deciding what you want to achieve for your team. So pair with somebody, or maybe threes, Hannah, and what you want to do is discuss for a couple of minutes what is it that you want to address in your team. And I give you some examples. I want to improve the way that we as leaders are trusted. I want to understand what business challenges my colleagues are facing. I want my team to feel like they're better equipped with the solutions they need. And I want them to understand their goals better. Okay. So if you break into rooms, design a question, 1 to 3 questions. It might just be one. And then you can design a question around it. So, for example, I don't want the team to feel like there's a blame culture, and you can create a question around that then ultimately will enable you to go and put that into practice in the workplace.
How long are they getting in their breakout rooms, Adam?
I would say, should we give 4 minutes?
6. 4's quite tight.
Is it? Yeah, okay.
So do 2 minutes per
6
person.
minutes.
Here we go.
Have a chat about what you're trying to achieve, and then yeah, off you pop. Right, thank you, everyone. So hopefully you broke out into sessions that were useful in helping you to think about okay, and some of you may be doing this. What do I actually want from my team? Because if we don't know where our starting point is, we don't know how really to get to where we need to be. And I always like this analogy that Tony Latimer was one of the first MCC qualified coach talks about. That think of coaching as 3 ways. You get in a taxi and you want to go to the airport, and it's really foggy and you don't know where you're going. And the job of the coach is to do 3 things. Ultimately, know where the airport is to help the coachee find where the airport is, know where the taxi's based. But unless you clear all the fog, you're not going to be able to navigate your way through. And I like to think of that analogy when we're trying to structure our conversations and planning with our teams, because it's like, how do we know where we need to get to if we don't survey where we are now? So I've gone through the internal coach. There is 2 other steps to this, which is the hybrid coach and the leadership coach. And hopefully if we get a chance at another stage further down the line, I'll be able to extend this webinar. The whole thing is a little bit longer than that. So hopefully at this stage, you're not feeling like this kid and a little bit overwhelmed at 5 o'clock with a load of water splashing in his face like summer. So I am now going to wrap up and talk a little bit about these 3 stages. So we talked about the internal coach. The hybrid coach is actually looking at the model of how we blend being able to coach people, but then being able to ask that advice. Now, if any of you have coached your teams, you've probably been asked in the past, what do you think? And it's the one question that I always preface as a coach. We always go back and ask people to explore why they think your opinion is important. But the hybrid manager sometimes is that manager that actually needs to be able to provide advice and guidance, right? Sometimes you might have knowledge and information that your team member needs to know. And so you might need to pass that on. And then the organizational coach is, okay, how do we transcend that across the organization? So they're the steps for the first one. As I said, if we get chance at a later date, we'll look at putting some of the other sessions on so you can see what the full kind of suite of tools are within this kind of skill set. So I'd like you now just to think about, given what you've learned today, consider where you sit on the conscious competence matrix, which again, some of you may be familiar with. You might say, actually, I'm consciously competent. You might say, I'm unconsciously competent. I already know subliminally deep down what I need to do, and I need to know how I do it without even thinking. But what we aim to do as for our coachees, as well as for our own personal development, is try and create a greater sense of understanding and awareness, and how we can move through this conscious competence cycle so that we can understand better what our team's needs are, so that we can address them in the workplace. So let me ask you a question. If that was and seems like a viable way for you to support and develop your teams, would that be something that you're open to? And if you have a few choices here, you can do nothing and take a leap of faith, which again is 100% risk-free. I've got some resources that I've shared for you. And if you want to scan this code at the end of it, you'll be able to download an organizational toolkit along with some other resources. And Hannah's going to share with you how you can get involved further into this later on. So what you'll get if you do download these resources, these are on my coaching website, is an organizational health check, the blueprint templates that I talked about, a reflective toolkit that you can use with your team, the virtual coffee session, and also a newsletter with some coaching kind of tools and tips and techniques on. So you can visit adamarif.com/coaching if you want that, or just scan the QR code. But if you want more, already including some of the coaching observations, the training in the community, the masterclasses, and the observation workbooks, then you will be able to access this if you're employed, which I know a lot of you are taking advantage of, for a £250 employer fee. So that's all the program costs now, and we've been working with Hannah and the DiverseEd network for the past 12 months to try and increase our scope and increase the range of the people that we can connect with on this. So Hannah's going to run you through that now, and I think these are some of the programs we've got. So next October, we're looking to launch the next DiverseEd group, and I think that is it for me.
Brilliant. Thank you, Adam. Thank you. If you just go to the next slide, I'll just do a little bit of signpost, and then we can throw it out to the room. Read questions. I always ask people to think about what your commitments are going to be. Your commitment might be that you're going to look at some of those resources, or you're going to share the recording. I'll send the recording out to all of you as it's edited, or that you're going to tap some people on the shoulder in your own school, college, trust to sign up for this free level 5 coaching certification. Okay, so think about what you're going to commit to as an action point from joining us tonight. I appreciate it's 90 minutes of your time. If you click on, please, Adam, just do a little bit of signposting, and I will share this deck with you all. On our website, we have got some blogs about the power of coaching through the lens of diversity, the impact it has on the coach and the coachee about having that shared lived experience. We have got a toolkit. No worries, Amy, thank you. We've got a toolkit all about DEIB, support coaches and mentors. I want you to think about both of those two hats. Some of you might be here because you work in skits and teaching schools, and you have a lot of mentors who also need DEIB training, but your coaches also need DEIB training. All of your coaches will hopefully be qualified coaches, but there's an extra layer, I think, of PD that they need. We launched a DiverseEd coaching directory last year. We've currently got 40 coaches in it. Everyone in it holds a diverse identity. I get approached by a lot of trust PD leads, localities, saying we're getting pushback from our head teachers, our deputy heads, that our coaches don't reflect the identities of our leaders. Can you help us? So we have made that easier by curating that list. So on our website, there is a directory, but there's also a video introduction from all of them and a profile. So I'll pop that into the follow-up email. Some of you are here because you're in the cohort with Adam and the team. Some of you are here because you've been to our previous sessions. That should say part 1 and part 2. We hosted an event back in October where Yasmin, who worked with Adam, was our opening keynote. We hosted another event last month all about diversifying coaching, and those 2 videos are available on our website as further PD for you and your colleagues, and I'll send those links out to you. And then we've got an EOI that's open and running. We've had 185 people who are interested in doing this free, fully funded apprenticeship to get the level 5 coaching qualification. And as Adam said, we've got another cohort opening out in October. Those places are going to go really fast. So if you're here because you're interested, fill in the form. We'll send you the further documentation to fill in. If you're here because you have oversight of coaching in your organisation, think about who you might want to tap on the shoulder. Once they're in the process and they're going through the verification, it might be they miss out on October, but they join us next year in another cohort instead. Is that my last slide, or is there one more slide on there? I think that might be a toolkit slide. Yeah, we've got 40 DEIB toolkits now on the website. There's a whole toolkit there about the theme of belonging. If you want to share that with your DEI leads in your respective spaces. No worries, Julie, thank you. We've got the one, Julia, sorry, we've got the one there around coaching and mentoring. Another area I speak about quite a lot around inclusive workplaces and organizational development is cultural intelligence, and thinking about how we develop IQ, EQ, SQ, but also CQ. CQ being about how we navigate and work across different cultural identity groups.